Okay, everyone. Well, thank you again for coming and sticking all the way through to the end. The name of our conversation is, Are We in the Wild West of Data, Living in a World of Unethical Data Practices and Collections? Before we begin, and I want to introduce my panels. Actually, let's start with that. So my name is Ian Turner. I'm the Director of Strategic Partnerships here at Defined.ai, which is the largest marketplace for ethically sourced AI training data in the world. And I'm very pleased to be joined here by two amazing panelists.
Hello, thank you for being here tonight. My name is Alex. I'm the CEO and founder of a company called Woopi. He uses natural language processing to solve some hard problems. We'll talk a little bit about that later.
Thank you very much for the invitation. Very glad to be here. I'm Felipe Gutterres. I'm the CEO of Arara.io. What we do is basically we build ecosystem for supply chains to manage their ESG risks using finance to turbocharge risk reduction.
Thank you, gentlemen. So before we dive into our discussion, I want to make a distinction and a clarification. There's a lot of discussions around ethics on AI. It's a very broad topic, and I'm sure many of you had attended talks today about what are the ramifications of AI. And we touched on a lot of that in the last talk, whether that's the actual AI tasks themselves, the inferences that these models make, to the data collection themselves and those ramifications. This talk specifically is going to talk about the latter. How do these practices affect the individuals that contribute to these data sets, the companies that build their businesses on them, and what are those ramifications? When we came up with the title, I thought about it as an American. Wild West, what do we think? We think, lawlessness, cowboys. And to me, I was like thinking how the lack of regulation that we see across society right now, as it pertains to how data is collected and how these algorithms are created, reminded me of the Wild West. And as I connected with Alex, we had a conversation and realized that the actual parallels and the analogy actually goes a lot deeper than that. I don't know if you want to talk about that for just a moment.
Actually, the conversation with Ian so far has been amazing. I'm a South American, Ian is a North American, and the parallel with the West is amazing because if you think on how North America and South America were settled by white people, we cannot say discovered anymore because obviously there are just a bunch of settlers coming from Europe to meet civilizations that have been here for thousands of years. For a couple of hundred years, those new settlers, they stayed on the coast, on the east, on the Atlantic East, and they just decided to move west because there were some riches there. Which were worth the risk of crossing, of traveling on those uncharted territory. It was usually gold and silver. And in the path to do that, they created a lot of mayhem, a lot of destruction. And usually the people who suffered most of it were the native settlers of this land. And when it comes to data, it's the same thing, isn't it? Data has been there forever. But just when people noticed that it could have value, then this race for this data gold started. So in a lot of aspects of this talk, we'll talk on how this race for this new riches is driving our decisions, is driving companies, and is driving governments in these discussions.
Absolutely. And that brings us to our first question, which is, we all know that society, legislation, it always lags behind innovation and technology. So I want to ask my panelists this. What are the biggest ramifications that you guys are seeing in this past period of a world where data practices and data collection is completely unregulated? And Felipe, I want to start with you.
Yeah, I think first I would like to make a comment on the main theme that we started with. So I think that we have this dichotomy, there is a millennial dichotomy between bad and good, right? So, and being very cliche, so we know that data is the new oil. And we made a lot of war for oil, right? So what we do with data? So what we have been seeing is that basically there is a lot of discussion about the need of guardrails and what is happening in terms of legislation. And it's a good discussion. Today, Brazil is discussing the fake news bill, if they will vote or not the fake news bill. And the fake news bill is basically regulation on big tech, right? And how they have to behave, about data privacy, about being them held and responsible for what they do with data. So there are a lot of opportunities and there are a lot of things going on in terms of how you regulate and how you create an ethical framework to do that. Working with sustainability and after the discussion on the previous panel in terms of certification, in terms of having an ethical framework, it's not different from sustainability scores or sustainability certifications. So in a way that we have a framework to do good, to do the right with data, right? Which again is about this millionaire discussion about what the mankind wants to be, right?
And I'll bring a couple of aspects. The first one, and again, it's a parallel with the West. Unlawful is not necessarily illegal or unethical. At this point in time, there is no legislation that deals with data nowhere. Not in China, not in Europe, not in US, not in Brazil. But we know what is right or wrong, don't we? Do the companies know? Are they concerned with that right now? Because, I mean, we'll continue with that, and we know that the legislation lags behind. I think Ian will bring that. But, I mean, we are doing that with no regard to any ethical parameters. So I'm not doing only about data. What about the underpaid data labelers in Africa making $1 an hour? What about the effect that this has on the minds of our young people and children? So, I mean, there is much more to be discussed when we talk about this gold rush or this data rush. And I think this is bigger than us, and we have to bring that, and we have to alert the society about what's going on.
Absolutely. The ramifications they're pretty much ubiquitous. They affect all of us. That whether we are a young child who's getting engaged with their first smartphone or having their identity stolen, all the way up to the largest corporations and governments. And so while we hear about, like Felipe said, like what guardrails and what frameworks do we want to put in, we can personalize it and make it meaningful to us to take action by thinking about that young teenage girl who may be addicted to her smartphone because of the amount of mining and data analytics that have been pulled from her to get her to stay on that device. And that is legitimately, and we've all seen The Social Dilemma on Netflix, that is the business model of Instagram, of Facebook. And obviously we talked about the bullying. Yeah. So we were talking about this, and there's a really great book called The Coddling of the American Mind around these types of things. And one of the analogies we were discussing as we were prepping for this is when we all went to school, if we had a bully, when 3 o'clock hit, we'd go home and that bully would also go to his house. But these kids nowadays, they aren't never free from the negative mental health effects that they go through at school. And so who knows what, legislative steps we need to take for that, but we need to act, clearly. To that point, and as you mentioned, there is no legislation, but we know that there's something wrong here. What actions and ripples have you started seeing corporations, individuals, businesses? What type of actions have you seen these entities starting to take in response to these observations?
The first one is there is no law, right? But we know what is right. And we know that even if the legislation takes a while to come, it will come. So, I mean, would you build your company over a business model that will probably have to be rethought or rebuilt because the legislation will start asking you, how transparent is your data? How was it collected? How good it is? I mean, can I understand the algorithms? So for me, it's a business decision to understand how to deal your data. It's a very good business decision to understand where it came from. How do you deal with it? Because if you don't do that, then investors like Teresa and like Rodrigo, maybe in a couple of years, because everybody's coming so fast when it comes to it, will start asking fair questions about how you got it. And if you got it on the wrong way, probably it will take you to a dead end. So your growing, fast-growing company will come to a dead end because you have to go back and rebuild everything.
Yeah, I fully agree. I think that, again, it depends on the business practices, how you build your business model, your company, and your business practices. So, but I think that there is a role there for legislation. And we have been seeing a lot of good discussions from OECD, UN, EU, some commissions in France, Germany, Canada, and you have the AI and innovation commissions discussing how to manage data in a proper way, in an ethical way. So I think that these discussions define a little bit the guardrails that we should follow, right? But besides that, there is again a decision. What do you want to do? Do you want to do good, or you want to do bad? And we were discussing about that, right? So if you take sustainability, for example, and sustainable investment, you have one thing that is basically an exclusion list for some areas that an investor that is looking for sustainability should not invest. So we are talking about fossil fuel, we are talking about guns, we are talking about tobacco, things like that, right? So what will happen in the future with companies and industries that are not respecting data privacy, that are not using properly data? So would they be part of these exclusion lists in the future? So, and how can we do that? And how we fight against addiction of algorithms that are always there and we are using them. So I think there's a role that legislators have, there's a role that society has, and there's a role that we as an individual have.
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of reactionary legislative movements that we see in the world, whether it's Italy banning OpenAI for how they collect the data, to Reddit from a commercialization perspective, trying to actually productize their corpus via API as opposed to having it stolen, frankly, from OpenAI in order to train its large language models. But as Felipe and Alex are alluding to, we will be more proactive and we will start moving with more intention into the future, putting these guardrails ahead of time as opposed to just reacting when a new technology comes out and everybody starts to freak out. So actually, I'll make that our final question. You know, everyone, we're all entrepreneurs here. We're all in the tech space and often when we think of regulation, laws, government, we find that as a blocker, a dampener on innovation, on business, on the ability to be successful. But as we discussed, and as we've already alluded to, there can be reason for optimism based on knowing what is right to do. So going forward into the future, as these legislations start to unfold and go into place, what is your general attitude and what are your thoughts for businesses?
Get your data right, get it from reliable sources, explain your algorithms. I know it's hard when it comes to machine learning, but I mean, most of the scientists I talk around the world, and it's crazy, right? Because usually entrepreneurs don't like legislation. They are saying, please legislate, please regulate, because we are all afraid. I was talking to a friend a few days ago, and I said, look, if you go to the Association of Pilots on American Airlines and you talk to them, and each one of them tells you, we are afraid about our planes, would you fly? We are doing exactly the same thing. If you talk with any scientist in the world right now that has been like me on so many years on AI, in my case more than 15 years, they will tell you, we are afraid. We don't know where this thing is going. Please do something. Please, government, do something. Please establish some guardrails here. And we have to do that. And we have to be, if something, okay, we have to be part of the conversation, because we might be better or worse legislators, some here or there. But I mean, we have to be part of the conversation to explain what's possible, what isn't, what can be done, what cannot be done. But we need that sorted out soon, because, well, the world is not waiting.
Yeah, I was thinking about if AI is amplifying the human nature, right? Again, the good and the bad. And we are praying for some legislation to help us to behave well. And if you discuss legislation, you can see that legislation failed in various areas, right? You take the US, for example, and various business segments and the discussion happening right now. But how AI can help legislators to have solutions faster? We did not think about that. We are not considering that in our equations so far. And I think that we should. It will happen, and it can help us, right, to behave well.
What Felipe is referring to is a conversation we had around how eventually best practices and establishing what ethical AI means. Some people don't, when I mention it to people at Web Summit, they say, what do you mean by ethical AI? But being more precise in our terms, understanding what we mean, but even down the road, productization implications. How can one either use AI to help audit people's data sets, make it more of an automated process, and make it just more mainstream, and what is the standard as opposed to what's the exception now? I want to do a quick quickly kind of bring it back to our thesis about the Wild West, and then I'll let you guys, if you have any closing thoughts. The analogies that we had with that theme, it's manifold. The motivations of those who are acquiring the resources, the positioning of the people who are most adversely affected, the unfair compensation we didn't discuss. The parallels are kind of eerie in a lot of ways, and so any of us who are amateur or just history enthusiasts, we should all note that we need to learn from our past, and so we're sitting at the precipice of the AI revolution, the summer of AI, as some of our customers have told us. And we want to make sure that we tread cautiously. But before I adjourn, I'll give it to my panelists for closing thoughts if they have any.
Well, it was a pleasure to be here. It was a huge pleasure, the conversation we have had, and I'm sure it will continue. I think it's a moment of taking responsibility. I'll disagree with my friend Rodrigo. He just left, and we had. Yeah, we had a great conversation a few years back, and he gave me some advice which are very important, and I just thanked him for it. But I don't think the important applications of large language models are 5 years down the road, because our labs are doing it now. We are delivering them now. So it's not in a 3 months time or 6 months time. Therefore, there is not that many time to decide what to do. And again, let's go to the initial theme. I mean, obviously, we cannot judge history in hindsight. I cannot go 500 years back and say it would be wrong to do this or that. It doesn't make any sense. But this is a time, and we have to make some very important decisions. And I would not like to look in hindsight in 50 years and said, we didn't act fast enough. We didn't act with the energy we needed to. So this is the moment, and we are responsible for that, because there are those 10,000 people, and that 10,000 people have to be involved. I mean, it would be just easy to say, okay, we are on AI, we'll make a lot of money. Screw it. But I think our responsibility to society is bigger than that.
I think that sustainability and what is happening right now with AI is very connected. So if the society and we want a more sustainable world, if we want to fight against climate change, if we want to be here, we are aligned with sustainable practices. If we align with sustainable practices, we will have to redefine speed with AI, but we will need to go for a more sustainable world. And if it's right, we will go into the right direction. If it's wrong, I think that we will go very fast to the wrong way.
Thank you very much, guys. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.